Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
I see it as an important part of the regeneration of St. Louis. Everyone knows that the Missouri Botanical Garden is a world-class institution and has a huge reputation around the world. But we didn't have a world-class entry, and we do now.
This week on a special edition of Spotlight, an exclusive tour of the Missouri Botanical Garden's new Jack C. Taylor Visitor Center, led by Garden President Peter Wyse Jackson. We'll visit the new, bigger and better conservatory, restaurant, and gift shop. We'll see how the new visitor center combines technology and nature for a world-class experience. And we'll get a look at improvements made at another popular garden attraction. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
What an extraordinary day it is for the Missouri Botanical Garden, and an incredible milestone in the garden's history.
There are many ways to chart the popularity of the Missouri Botanical Garden, but one of the most telling has been the size of its front door. When it opened in 1859, this small stone gate on Tower Grove Avenue was big enough to handle the garden's first visitors. But by 1920, the crowds were so large and Henry Shaw's original gate so inadequate, money was borrowed to build a new gate, 2.5 times bigger, just down the street, where it still stands today. And for more than 60 years, it was good enough. But in 1982, with attendance continuing to grow, the main entrance was moved around the corner and enlarged again. The Ridgeway Center, with its distinctive barrel-vaulted ceiling, would serve as the garden's gleaming front door for 40 years. And now, they have done it again.
Welcome to the Jack C. Taylor Visitor Center.
It's quite spectacular.
It is an extraordinary building, and we're really proud of all that's been achieved with this wonderful building for the garden and for St. Louis.
It is the largest construction project in the garden's history, and the first major project since the restoration of the garden's museum, which was completed in 2018. The $100 million Jack C. Taylor Visitor Center is far more than just a new entrance. Here, technology and nature work in harmony to create a visitor experience more accessible, sustainable, and practical than ever before. Why was there a need to replace the Ridgeway Center?
It was built to accommodate about 250,000 visitors a year. And we're getting regularly 1 million visitors coming through the center. The building itself was not performing well and was coming to the end of its useful life. And we could have tried to fix it up, but we would have ended up having spent a lot of money and have better restrooms, and that was about the end of it. Sometimes it's better just to start again and do something that is really going to be a world-class center, as this is.
What is this? I guess it's a sculpture, you would call it, above our heads?
Yes, it is. And this is an area that we call the Lantern over the William T. Kemper lobby. And it has a series of screens, scrim, which are laser-cut, perforated screens that reflect the view of dappled light coming through a woodland canopy. So when the sun is shining and the sun goes round the building over the course of the day, different light patterns are shed onto the floor below to give a sense of being in a woodland. During the night times, we light it up with different colours. So when the cardinals are doing really well, it was glowing red. And I'm waiting for St. Patrick's Day, it's going to be green.
the floor is very interesting.
It is. A lot of work and thought went into creating this, this floor with the brass leaves from selected native trees from Missouri were reproduced from our collections. The actual leaves were then copied and cut out in brass and put into this floor amongst cut river pebbles. And you can see the tulip tree, and you can see an elm, and the liquid amber, and the sassafras, and ash trees, and chestnuts. So there are about 20 native Missourian tree species that are represented on this floor.
Are there tours given where people can learn about these things, or?
There is, and there's around the corner there is a key so that people can check as to what an individual leaf is, what species it is. This is a very large video screen which we can use to talk about what's happening at the garden, to introduce people to some of the activities that are going on at any particular time, that introduce activities and membership to visitors to the garden. It's a video screen that so many people would love to have to watch cardinal games on or whatever, but it really provides us a way to bring what's going on at the garden straight to the visitors as soon as they come in.
It's a great sort of dynamic way to reach them
Yes.
immediately as they come in the door.
And it's all managed by computer so that we can put in new little elements almost on a daily basis as we need to. So it's not in any way static. It's an up-to-date sort of bulletin board of what's going on at the garden.
The garden experience now begins even before visitors enter the visitor center. The landscaping beds around the building hold more than 40,000 individual plants raised for the garden at the garden.
In planting new gardens around the centre, we wanted to make sure that we brought something new to the garden. So by and large, the species that we are including and have included and will include in those planting beds are new to the garden. They're also new to St. Louis. We will put in a small number of semi-mature trees just to give the more instant impact. And those are a mixture of some of our wonderful native trees of Missouri, but also extraordinarily rare and unusual trees from many different parts of the world. We have been able to source plant material from throughout the Midwest, the United States, and indeed throughout the world. And by and large, these species that we're growing are grown from seed in our own nurseries, which means that they are of much greater use for science and for conservation purposes, and also for educational purposes, explaining and demonstrating the breadth of diversity of the world's flora. What I'm also really thrilled about is that most of them are our contribution to conservation. Most of them are species that are in danger of extinction in the wild. And we can make a very strong message about the role that the garden is playing in saving hundreds, if not thousands, of species from extinction through its work. We have wanted to make sure that this building has many different plant elements brought into it, that everywhere you go in the building you have a sense that plants have contributed to the building space. This is I believe, a wonderful modern seating element for the lobby here. It's made from sustainable timbers. It's oak, white oak. And it really gives a sense of the organic shape and form that one would expect in a building where we're celebrating plants. This is a wonderful log bench created by a craftsman in Missouri using a tree that was close to the end of its life in the garden on the footprint of the new centre. And we thought how nice it would be to use this and give it some immortality. It is Quercus schumardii, the Schumard oak, a native oak species to this region. It's about 80 to 90 years old. We can count the rings and see the exact age that it was. And then it has been carved out to make a wonderful log bench And on the back of it, a slice was taken off, and that has been used in another place in the restaurant to make a long table that people can sit at. So bringing the botany, bringing the plant species and the specimens into the new building has been part of what we've been trying to achieve in making this really plant-friendly.
Any idea what that weighs?
It took 16 people to maneuver this into place when we brought it in.
From overhead to underfoot, sustainability is an important feature of the new visitor center. The roof is covered with solar panels. Its extensive stormwater collection system is being used to hydrate the landscaping. And in the parking lot, the garden has added additional vehicle charging stations. The emphasis on sustainability at the new visitor center began when they tore down the old visitor center. The demolition of the Ridgeway building produced 1,800 tons of concrete and masonry and nearly 600 tons of metal, which the garden recycled. Also recycled is the name of the garden's restaurant. But most everything else in the new sassafras dining room is bigger, better, and more educational.
We have in the Sassafras restaurant created a whole series of panels that reflect different aspects of the garden's work with plants. They feature different subjects laid out in the most wonderful geometric and artistic patterns. We've got a captive audience to look at stories relating to the garden and its work with plants. For example, on the wall here we have pressed specimens of 2 wild grapevines of the Missouri Valley. And these are the 2 species that were used to create rootstock that saved the French wine industry. Because when the phylloxera weevil hit the French wine-producing industry and killed off the famous vineyards, they brought specimens, seeds and cuttings from the Missouri Valley, from these 2 species, and used those as rootstock, which were resistant to the phylloxera.
We saved the wine industry in France.
I'm hoping one day I might go and tell them about it, and I'll get the odd glass of wine from Bordeaux.
These look like posters, but they're not.
They were all created by taking leaves and parts of plants from the garden's living collections and then laying them out in designs that really looks like an art piece, but equally it represents the work that the garden does with the world's plant diversity. For example, this one is plants used as herbs and spices. On the bottom you can see images from the garden's herb garden.
These are pressed into some sort of plastic?
These are pressed between 2 sheets of glass. And you can see them from both sides. All of the species on this display are specimens that are rare and endangered in the wild and are being saved from extinction by being cultivated in the garden. For example, along the top there is a little plant with bell flowers called Nisocodon mauritianus that I first collected on a cliff on the island of Mauritius. We have cycads, which date back to 300 million years ago as some of the first land plants, and many of them are endangered, and they're there too. And next to it is a panel made up of the wonderful variety of seeds that are conserved in the long term in our seed bank. We collect particularly from endangered species and store seeds, and they can be at low temperatures and low moisture levels. They can live, some of them indefinitely. And we have a seed bank which people can't see because it's behind the scenes, but from this panel they can get a sense of what is happening. When you think about the fact that there are a relatively small number of plant species that feed the world, many of them are the cereals, wheat, rice, maize. These illustrate the wild relatives from which those crop plants that feed the world are derived. And they're all grown in the garden here.
I understand people are really commenting about the climatron. It seems closer?
I have made the joke about the hardest part of this building was moving the climatron closer to the new centre. We, of course, didn't. But when you came through the old Ridgeway Centre, you were really not sure which way to go, whether you would go left, down to the Linnaean House and more steps, or right to the tram shelter, and then directly in front of you was a grove of trees. And it was only when you wandered down a path could you actually see the climatron. Now the vistas that open up into the garden directly from the new centre show the climatron in all its glory. And indeed, when you look out south through the building, there is a sense of a golden semicircle of some of the garden's greatest features: the climatron, the temperate house, the new Emerson Conservatory, the historic Linnaean House, and this building itself. And that's really strong. It draws people out of the centre into the garden. And indeed, we feel that the centre is a part of the garden in a way that the Ridgeway Centre never was.
While the Jack C. Taylor Visitor Center is the focal point of the new gateway to the garden, improvements to the entry experience have also been made at the nearby Linnaean House.
The Linnaean House was built by Henry Shaw and is one of our most historic buildings, and it was constructed as an orangery. Traditionally, the orangeries were built by the European aristocracy to grow exotic plants such as citrus, pineapples, and other species, so that they would be able to serve them on their dining room tables and entertain their guests and show off about having really exotic species and fruits. Shaw built an orangery, and over the years it evolved to be used for other purposes. But we're going to return it to its primary purpose as an orangery, where many of the different varieties of oranges and lemons and grapefruits and mandarins and varieties that we know and love from our local greengrocers will thrive. And we will display it in a way that is reminiscent of how an orangery used to look in Victorian times when they were most popular.
One of the most striking features of the new visitor center is the Emerson Conservatory, a vast improvement over the floral display hall at the Ridgeway Center.
In the Ridgeway Centre, we had a large box-like structure space, the Orthwine Floral Display Hall, where we would have the gardens orchid show and the holiday flower and train show and some meetings. It had dreadful acoustics. It also was really bad space to grow plants. We couldn't leave anything in there for too long because the plants would start to die. It just didn't have enough light, whereas a new conservatory is designed for perfect growing space for exotic plants. So we decided that we would, in this new building, we would do something entirely new. We would build a conservatory where the plants would be very, very happy to grow, and some of them could be left permanently. But we'd also be able to have the regular shows, the orchid show in the early spring and the holiday flower and train show over the holiday period, but against a background of permanent plantings. And the theme of the Emerson Conservatory is Mediterranean plants. We will have permanent plants from the Mediterranean on display, from different Mediterranean parts of the world. So there will be South African plants, there will be plants from the Canary Islands, from southern Chile, from Western Australia, plants which we have really not been able to grow and display at the garden before.
Using air instead of shovels, an old olive tree was delicately unearthed, lifted out, and moved from its former home in the garden's temperate house to its new home as the centerpiece in the Emerson Conservatory.
Olives are very resilient, and you can dig them up and move them to new locations. When you look at the way they grow throughout the Middle East in the most apparently unproductive habitats, they grow slowly, so you can move it, and it should do very well, despite being shifted across the garden.
While moving the olive tree was optional, moving this was not.
In the Ridgeway Visitor Centre, in the central area of that, we had a wonderful blue Chihuly chandelier. And many people ask where that is now. And I'm really pleased to say that during the demolition of Ridgeway Centre, we took it down very carefully. It was cleaned, and we have put it up in the centre of the Climatron, where it is enjoyed by everyone who goes into that extraordinary building. Things get moved around, so who knows where it'll end up. But it's one of our most treasured objects of the garden, and will certainly always be on display.
Accessibility is really an important part of what you've been trying to do here, and this is a good example of that.
Absolutely. Accessibility is so important. The ticket desks here are deliberately kept at a low level, so whatever height you are, whether you're in a wheelchair or whether you're tall, it is fully accessible. We want to ensure that this is a garden for everyone, that everyone gets a warm welcome. Everyone, no matter how good they are on their feet or in other ways, feels comfortable and welcome here. And so accessibility was a non-negotiable part of the design of this building.
I see these dots on the glass. Is that to keep people from bumping into the windows while they're sort of looking around?
I suppose it might, but the purpose of it was to to prevent bird strikes. Because the birds, if they're flying by and they don't see the glass, but they do see the dots, and they will say, oh, I'm not going that direction. We have not had, since this building opened, we've not had bird strikes as a result.
The new Jack C. Taylor Visitor Center also includes classrooms and an auditorium where visitors can learn about the garden's history and mission by watching a short video before their visit. And on their way out, there is a new and expanded gift shop, full of typical souvenirs and living ones. But perhaps the biggest change from the previous visitor center is the addition of a dedicated event center.
The event center will be a wonderful addition to the garden. Of course, we've always had events in our visitor center here at the garden, but it was often a logistical nightmare to combine special events and meetings and conferences and other activities with the fact that we had thousands of people coming through each day. And the event center provides us with a dedicated space where we can have all of these meetings and activities with its own entrance. We can also use it for the ways in which many people enjoy the garden, which is to make the garden part of their family special celebrations, such as weddings, and there will be, I think, some spectacular dinners and so on provided there in the future. And it just gives us that extra space to be able to bring people in to use the garden in a way that they couldn't effectively in the past.
What would you say is your favorite feature of this new building?
I do love the biophilic elements of the building. I love the fact that when I look at a particular leaf on the floor made from brass, that I can remember all of the debates as to whether we would use this leaf or another one. So there are lots of personal elements where I can remember and get pleasure from the little stories, that the many hours of discussions and debate about what we would do where, and being very satisfied, very relieved how well it has all turned out. This building has been funded entirely from private donations in St. Louis. We all know that St. Louis is a wonderfully generous community. So when we asked the garden's supporters and friends and many people in the business community too, they stepped up to the plate, and we were able to fund the building without going to the taxpayers, for example, and the funds to complete the building were put in place. I see it as an important part of the regeneration of St. Louis. Not just a valuable asset for the garden, but everyone picked up very quickly on the importance of it. Everyone knows that the Missouri Botanical Garden is a world-class institution and has a huge reputation around the world. But we didn't have a world-class entry for it. We do now.
You must really be proud of this.
I'm very pleased with the way it's gone. I'm particularly proud of St. Louis for having made this a possibility. I must say, if anybody suggests to me that we should do another project like that in the middle of a pandemic, you're quite welcome to kick me very hard. But without having an extraordinary team of people involved in all aspects of it, it wouldn't have happened. And I think that there is St. Louis and everyone at the garden and all of those associated with the project, donors, contractors, designers, architects, should be very proud of their work.
It's like in music, you got different instruments. They got to play a symphony. So even these that we take from nature, they have to play the symphony of this mural.
The mural was first created shortly before Henry Shaw opened the museum and indeed the whole Missouri Botanical Garden to the public. And over the years it deteriorated.
It has to be close to the original because it's a historic recreation. It's an homage of some sort to something that was really beautiful and very well done.
Part of the excitement of this restoration of the building is we are able to go back to peel off the layers of paint and do a faithful replica of what had been there in 1859.
Next week, the premiere of History Spotlight, a look at our city's rich past, plus something brand new at the Gateway Arch using virtual reality. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.